This is going to be, I'm on vacation, so I think this will be a briefer update than the usual ones that I give. Wish you would pray, continue prayers for Pam and I as we are on a little bit of a vacation. You might be able to see from the background. Don't really have great lighting here because it's so bright in the back, but we're at a friend's house on Lake Minnetonka outside of Minneapolis. We've had a great vacation. It's interesting as you travel around, particularly America, so that's where I live, so I'm going to travel around America. You see these wide open spaces. We were in, one day we were in Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, and North Dakota on the same day, or 2 days apart. And when you look at the size of like Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, they're about 5.5 times the size of the state of Ohio where we live, but they just have a little bit more population than the metropolitan area of Columbus, Ohio. And anybody who says that the world is overcrowded has never driven through the West. We were in Colorado at a family wedding. This is a picture of the Tetons when we were supposed to be there on Sunday, but we hit a chuck hole on our way up there in the Rockies and had to go back to Denver and get a new rim. Well, actually new rims for the car, so they matched, and a new tire. We did happen to go to the one store in Denver that had the exact same tire that they had one of the exact same tire we already had on the car. So that worked out, and had great help from a Colorado Game and Wildlife guy that stopped by to help change our tire way out in the middle of nowhere, and we were within a half mile either direction of having absolutely no cell phone service. So the Lord provided. We got an extra night in Denver, but then we had to double up on our trip, and so we've done close to 800 miles, including visiting a national park on some days. So Monday we left Denver. We drove up to Teton. If we'd gone up on Sunday when we had planned on it, we would have been arriving at Teton near the campground where they found that the girl from Florida's body. And also it was raining that day. So when we arrived at Teton at the entrance, you could not see the mountains at all because of a snowstorm. And then as we drove into the park, the snowstorm cleared, and you can see from this picture that there was fresh snow on the top of the peaks of the Teton Mountains in Wyoming. Absolutely maybe the most dramatic mountain range on the planet, and had a very interesting backlight. We were there near sunset, so as the sun was dropping down behind the mountains, it was reflecting off the clouds around the peak of the mountains. You see the big cloud there at Grand Teton. Looks like Grand Teton is smoking or spewing steam, but it's not. It's just a cloud, and the cloud then it bounced off the back of the cloud and lit up part of the front of the mountain. So it's just absolutely stunning. Here's Jenny Lake. Here's the next day we were in Yellowstone National Park, and you can see the Teton Range there in the distance across Yellowstone Lake. Yellowstone's just, these parks, Yellowstone is just fabulous. We also went to Mount Rushmore. I don't have any pictures of that. And here's the Badlands of South Dakota. So we covered a lot of territory. As I said, close to 750 to 800 miles on Tuesday, and just wide open spaces. And the interesting thing I find about this is, look, I'm a hardcore creationist. God created the world. I'm a young earth creationist. But it's interesting that with all this diverse landscape, how God tuned us, particularly those of us who are believers, to appreciate the beauty of God's creation. So we have just had a great time in a lot of states that are probably free and open, unlike any others. So let's do a little bit of a prophecy update today. Apologize for the travel log there. Today I'm just going to do a little bit about the Great Setup Continued. That's a title I used way back, or part of a title that I used for a talk I gave to the Last Days Bible Conference up in Canada, virtually of course, since you can't really go to Canada. Well, you maybe can go now if you meet certain entry requirements. but it's just the one thing I've noticed is we've driven around and we've talked to different people from all over the country, from Maine to Mississippi to North Dakota to California, Arizona. We've just met an incredible number of people, including spending a little time fellowshipping with a great group of people last night here in Minnesota, and our friends, of course, as well. It's clear that everybody knows that something is going on, that this is not normal. Even with the increase in people that are getting the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, there's still an incredible impingement on people's freedom. It is, in my view, it is tyranny, and we can argue about what the response to that should be, but I will tell you that, in my view, tyranny kills people. And since we're really about the gospel, I know that dead people never accept the gospel, and so that's why I think we need to resist these things in a godly way, godly manner. But it is, as we have talked to person after person, something is not right. The world is different. It's changed. By the way, if you hear noise in the background, we're on a lake, so it's about close to 80 degrees here in the Minneapolis area. This is Lake Minnetonka behind me. So people are out on their boats, so you might hear some noises. So just try to ignore those and listen to the update. And there's also a guy, though, that might be kind of interesting. If I can catch him on camera, he lives across the lake and he has his own pontoon plane, and he'll go out and fly around for 10 or 15 minutes and then come back and land. He has sort of the ultimate lake toy. So here's some of the platforms that we're on. We stream live on Facebook. Of course, not today since I'm out of town. By the way, we did a tribute to Pastor Steve Mitchell today at church. I believe that that's going to be edited and put up, some of the tributes of what people had to say. Pastor Steve passed away 1 year ago yesterday, and it's been continue to keep his wife and daughter in prayer. It's a difficult thing to go through, to lose a husband like that, and for the church to lose a great pastor and great man like Steve Mitchell. So here's some of our platforms. We talk each week about the convergence of events and how there's my talk in Canada, I sort of set up a framework or a grid for how I view end time events, and I use the acronym ACLU, acceleration. Things that are predicted in the Bible are going to be coming together faster and faster, and I think we see that happening. There'll be a convergence. All the lines of Bible prophecy are going to be happening at the same time, and because they're happening at the same time, it's almost going to be like the vortex of center of a hurricane or the vortex of a tornado. It's going to be a very turbulent time, and I think we're really living in a very turbulent time. Even the interesting thing too about being on vacation and driving around was, while all this turbulence is going on, there's also a great sense of peace and calm when you're away from the big urban centers where these, I don't know how else to describe it, these psychotic lunatics are in charge in a lot of cases. So it's a strange juxtaposition. I talked to this group of people last night, and that's one of the things I mentioned, was that for all the turmoil, I have a strange sense of peace and calm about the way things are going in the world, because I know the end result, and I know what mission that we as the church and believers and remnant believers of God are to be on during this period of time. So it is, believe me, it's a world disrupted unlike you've ever seen. This is a little meme that I found. I think I've used it before. Obey, consume, reset, sort of a updated picture of Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. And I'm going to, early on in my talk today, my update, I'm going to deal a little bit with some of the things I think that are coming together with the Great Reset. So I appreciate your patience on this being up late. We were doing things with our friends today and recording it, and when I record it away from the church, I have to do all the video, the lighting, the audio, and that type of thing. So it gets a little bit and prepare to give the talk. So driving in the car, it's a little bit hard. The state laws in all the states we were in object to you reading and working on your computer while you're driving. So here we go. So here's the first thing. This is about the state of Victoria in Australia. And I believe the premier or president of that state is a guy named Daniel Patrick, who I think is probably the most of these lunatics that are running things now. And he's talking about, if you want freedom, you have to get the state-approved treatment for the Charlie Vector 019er thing that we're dealing with, and if you don't get that, you won't have freedom. That's your only hope at freedom. And even there, until 70 or 80% of the people get the state-approved treatment for the Charlie Vector 019er thing that is out there in the world right now, nobody's going to get their freedom. In fact, some of the state of Victoria's rules say that even when everyone gets the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, they're going to have to, for example, churches are going to be limited. In many cases, if they do nothing, they're going to be limited to like attendance of 20. Doesn't really make any difference the size of the facility they have. And if they do that, they might be limited to 50 or 100 people, even if everyone has received the state-approved treatment, and they're going to be requiring masking and social distancing. So if you want to go to a restaurant in Victoria, you're going to have the state-approved treatment and that sort of thing. And it's just, it's an incredible impingement on freedom. And I have to tell you, I think that Australia, which is a democracy and which does have some freedom, it doesn't have the free speech in their founding documents like the United States does, but they do have some rights, and they're a democracy. But these psychotic lunatics that are in charge down there, to me, it seems like it's a test case for a large part of the rest of the world for this Great Reset, or the great setup for the Great Reset that we see. So I think Australia is a test case. It's amazing, if you remember, Australia sort of started out as a penal colony, and it's interesting that it seems that like they're back there now. So pray for the people in Australia as they deal with these issues. They're pretty serious. This is a story out of the UK at one of the Oxford colleges. I will say Worcester College, Worcester, somebody might say, at Oxford, brought in a group, I think it was the Christian Concern Group, a great group that deals with religious freedom issues in the UK. They were brought into the college to talk. Under the colleges, the university college, they're supposed to be interested in free and open debate of ideas. And the Oxford College now has apologized for allowing this Christian group to come to campus because it triggered other people. As I've looked at the media this week, I see example after example after example of this being done. For example, the American Library Association, Abigail Schreier wrote a great book on the transgender assault on young females and how they're encouraging young females to receive these really these treatments that mutilate them. Even though they may, a lot of cases may decide later that they did not want the treatment, they're mutilated for life, and they start puberty blockers. So Abigail Schreier wrote a great book about it. I can't remember the title right off the top of my head, but last year it was banned in a lot of places. So the American Library Association put that book on its this is one of the books that was banned. Like To Kill a Mockingbird is often banned because of the subjects that it deals with and the inability of people in modern society to understand that this is a book about a time that existed that I don't think still exists. If it exists, it's in very, 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 very limited situations in the United States. So they banned these books, and the American Library Association listed Abigail Shrier's book as one that was banned last year when it came out. And then because it triggered certain people in the alphabet soup community, the American Library Association issued this apology. Oh, we can't believe we put this out. We can't believe we triggered people. So this is what you're going to see. So here you see this situation where Oxford College is apologizing for what they did. Another thing that happened in the UK is that there has been this case going on involving Kira Bell for many years. She was a female who, I believe she was a female who transitioned to a male when she was a minor with court approval and, of course, with the approval of the National Health Service in Great Britain. And this has been a problem. And Abigail Shrier and others note and research that there has been a tremendous spike in the number of females seeking to transition to males. And there are clusters of them where it's happening. It's like it's almost hip and cool. And so they're taking people at a vulnerable time and they're exploiting them and doing these they give them puberty blockers. And people don't really know because they're giving in such quantity, don't really know the long-term effect of these. But it's okay because we want them to find themselves and do things and leave parents out of it. So there was a intermediate court in the UK that struck down the lower court. I believe this is what happened. I'm trying to simplify it. She filed a lawsuit. The lower court dismissed the lawsuit. The appellate court, intermediate appellate court, reinstated the lawsuit, said that, parents need to know about this, and now it has gone to a higher court, and this higher court has said, this is an article from the Times of London, and essentially this is what the court opinion said: parents' consent not needed to block puberty, say judges. Now I want you to understand that this does not end with puberty blockers. This is a state government assault on the right of parents to raise their children as they see fit. This is egregious. This is wrong. This is unbiblical. This is, in my opinion, it is demonic. It comes from a dark spiritual force that would be behind these things. And so I think the appropriate is Christian Concern, and there's an organization that Martin Iles runs down in Australia. I think these are great organizations. Here we have Liberty Counsel, Alliance Defending Freedom, Rutherford Institute, and a number. They're fighting these things, but it does not stop with puberty blockers. Understand, in the UK, as they increase the scope of the state approval for treatment, for the state-approved treatment of Charlie Vector 019er, this case is going to be cited as authority for the National Health Service and others to interfere in the parent-child relationship, and they're already doing this. I think I've seen that they're doing this in Australia, and they're doing this in the UK with children above 12, that we will make a determination, we the state, our state institutions, the NHS or the education system, we will make a determination as to whether the child is mature enough under the age of majority, when they can't they can't drive a car, they can't own certain properties, they can't do certain things because of their age. But this child, now children, will be deemed mature enough to make this particular decision. No law provides for it. It is a court-made thing, and I personally think that it is from very dark spiritual forces that are doing this. Here's a front page of the decision. It comes from the Well, this is a court of appeals, so I don't know if it's gone. I don't know what the highest, I don't know the court system in the UK well enough to say. This is problematic. At the same time that this is going on, there are all kinds of economic pressures. This article from one of the business papers, cargo delays are getting worse, but California ports still rest on weekends. For example, here's a picture of the container ships waiting outside the port of Los Angeles, port of Long Beach to unload. I can tell you, driving around America, we drove by automobile lots all over Denver and other cities that we were in that are pretty close to empty of new cars. It's a shocking sight to see. There are racetracks that are storing vehicles simply because they can't get the few chips that they need to do this. And now we have this supply chain is disrupted. And this article notes, listen, in other countries, the people at the ports work 24/7, but at the Port of Los Angeles, Long Beach, even with this backlog, they're taking a day off. And part of that is because they're putting in requirements for people to get the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, and people are resisting it and they're firing it. Now, I've been contacted by some people who are working with groups of first responders in some cities, and my advice to them has been, if you can fight this, it will be difficult. I do not know if you will be successful, but you need to, the only thing that will work is everybody that you can possibly get resisting it. Mass resistance is the only thing that's going to maybe stop this in its tracks. Make the people in charge fire half of their nursing staff and doctors in the midst of a pandemic. And I believe that there is this Charlie Vector thing is a real thing. Make them fire half of their nurses. Make them live with that decision. Make them live with firing first responders like firemen or policemen in the midst of a crime wave or in the midst of a drought. So there is going to be, because of this labor thing, there's going to be supply chain disruptions. I will say that the crops in Ohio, at least in central Ohio, look better than they ever have. I've never seen corn and soybeans look the way they look. And so if you go to the farmers markets, the vegetables are pretty cheap in price, dirt cheap, if you will, and they're huge. You got cantaloupe that look like basketballs. You got red peppers that look like softballs. It's incredible. But as we drove across western Kansas, eastern Colorado, which has a lot of farms, Wyoming, South Dakota, I would say that the condition of the crops from the road, of course, looked to be pretty poor. In Colorado, the corn was so bad, I don't even know why. I know they go out and cut it down because they have to do that to get their crop insurance. But it doesn't even look like it's worth to go out and try to cut down what's there and bring it in, because it's as bad as I've ever seen. And it was mile after mile after mile of this. So listen, I've told you, as we go through this period of time and the great setup to the great reset, then you need to prepare. You need to have some food stored up. You need to have water, food staples. There's plenty of websites out there that can help you prepare in a economically reasonable fashion. I just think that we are in a period of time where we are going to see this. There are further disruptions. Are this, for example, this is from the front page of the Times of London yesterday. Transport chaos spreads. Another big article on the inside of the paper. What they're doing is they're limiting the amount of petrol, gasoline that people can purchase, because people are going out and filling their cars up all at once. And there's a limited supply of gas. There's a supply chain. There's many reasons for it, but there is a supply chain disruption. Here's an article from today or Friday's Israel Hayom talking about the fact that aside from gasoline and petrol, natural gas is becoming in short supply in Europe. Supplies are 25%, or excuse me, I have to check and make sure I got that correct. They are down from what they are. And I talked to somebody in the energy industry when we were in one of the national parks, and they said that, listen, this is a problem because they are putting in place a requirement for renewable energy. When they put in the requirement for renewable energy, if the it creates a disincentive for them to build a power plant. So at the time that we're increasing demand for electricity by requiring the internal combustion engine to go away in the next 10 or 20 years, they're not building the power plants. At the same time that this is going on, well, let me just talk about natural gas before I go on. So their gas supplies are very low. The prices are spiking in Europe. And they're talking, we have to help poor people buy natural gas to heat their homes because there's a shortage, the price is up. So again, there's disruption in supply chains, and this is part and parcel, I think, of the great setup of the Great Reset. Listen, we know from Revelation 13 and other places there is coming this world economic system that will require you to have a mark to buy or sell. That system does not come about overnight. I think the mark comes at a particular time. I don't think the mark is here yet, but the infrastructure for that mark is being built. One of the ways that it's being built is through blockchain, which is related to Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin, I'm looking at these, they're moving Bitcoin computers from China to other places because China's cutting back or clamping down on Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. So they're moving their computers to Russia and Kazakhstan and to the US. All of these computers that conduct these calculations that are required for cryptocurrencies and blockchain, they consume a tremendous amount of power. I have read projections where the blockchain cryptocurrency power demands will at some point in the very near future exceed the power demands of everything else in human life. That is a big change, but they're not building power plants. So what's going to happen? Are we going to cut back on cryptocurrencies to save power so you can have power to charge up your car? This is, again, part and parcel of the great setup leading to the Great Reset. I think that we're at that time. So here's a report. This is a report that came out by the Secretary General of the UN I believe it was just this week, and they had a press conference and press release about it on the 21st, which would have been Tuesday. Our Common Agenda report of the Secretary General, and this is the accompanying press release that was issued with that. And listen to the titles of this and understand, we talk about this in Bible prophecy a lot, this coming world government, the New World Order, the Great Reset. And this is what the Secretary General of the UN says. And this, by the way, this is the week when the people met at the UN. I have not had time to view too many of the speeches. I have a couple comments about a couple of them. But this climate change thing was one of the main things on the agenda. And really, it's just a different way of saying the Great Reset. It's the same principles that are going. So look at what the Secretary General said. Solidarity missing in action. Secretary General tells General Assembly decrying malady of mistrust while stressing we must get serious. As if they're not doing enough damage already. Now they really want to do a lot of damage. And I have a section here coming up that that you in the United States, I hope, will understand the rather I don't know how else to say it, the dire straits in which we are on the economic side of things. And this is apart from these crazy, it's not $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill. It's not infrastructure. It's the left's wish list of spending on all kinds of things to radically change society. It's coming. It's here. And they're trying to push this through Congress. And I have to tell you at this point, if you vote for somebody on that side of the aisle, I'm telling you, you are acting against your own interest in every single instance. It's criminal. And they say it's $3.5 trillion. It's not. It's $6, $9, $10, $12 trillion is going to be spent. They're projecting deficits of $1 trillion a year for the next 10 years. How are they going to pay for that? And as some commentators have said, you're enslaving your children by letting them vote for this. This is really serious stuff. This is part of the Great Reset. So look at this, what the Secretary General said, by taxing carbon and pollution instead of people's income to more easily make the switch to sustainable green jobs. This is how we're going to do this. The Secretary General says, and it's interesting, you get criticized when you're talking about Bible prophecy and these things. Oh, you're apocalyptic, you're a negative Nelly, you shouldn't be talking about these things. Talk about positive, uplifting things. I'm only telling you what they say and the apocalyptic language that they use. Look at what the Secretary General of the United Nations just appointed to another term. This is a planetary emergency. We need coalitions of solidarity between countries that still depend heavily on coal and countries that have the financial and technical resources to support their transition. Listen, the cost of this is so enormous, nobody has the resources to support this. This is what they are doing is setting up the Great Reset. Look at this summary of this report. We are at an inflection point in history. In our biggest shared test since the Second World War, humanity faces a stark and urgent choice, a breakdown or a breakthrough. The coronavirus is upending our world, threatening our health, destroying economies and livelihoods, and deepening poverty and inequalities. There's some truth to that. They're the ones that are destroying the economies. I cannot believe, as we drove around, we would look on our apps for a restaurant or something and go to a restaurant and it's closed. It's permanently closed because some bureaucrat someplace decided that they needed to shut down. The big Costco and Walmart could stay open, but somebody that had a restaurant had to close. Churches can only have 20 people. Walmart and Costco can have 800 or 1,000 in their stores. It's crazy. Conflicts, the Secretary General, conflicts continue to rage and worsen. What does that sound like? Sounds like wars and rumors of wars. It says this: the disaster effects of a changing climate, famine, floods, fires, and extreme heat threaten our very existence. And look, there have been a lot of weather events. There's a lot of volcanic events, earthquake events going on right now. We have this island, La Palma, in the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, belongs to Spain, that is erupting. And the studies, and I talked about this many years ago. The study at that time was that if that mountain collapsed and there's a fault that goes all the way across it, so if this half of this mountain falls into the ocean, it could create tsunamis on the east coast of the United States in the tens of feet. Some say as high as 100 feet. Well, that we know what a relatively small tsunami wave did to the islands in Thailand back in 2004 on Boxing Day, 2003 or 2004 on Boxing Day. Hundreds of thousands of people died from that tsunami. What would happen if something like that hit the United States or hit the coast of Europe? It would also hit the coast of Europe and Africa. So we live at the time where all of the events that Bible prophecy talks about seem to be very near at hand and incredibly plausible. So here's some more things in his article. Look at this. He says, Now is the time to end the infodemic pandemic. You see how they're building this narrative that anybody who disagrees with the agenda is the problem. The war on science must end. All policy and budget decisions should be backed by science and expertise. This is what Patrick Wood talks about at Technocracy News, that the technocrats want to take over. There have been books written about this for the last 20, 30 years that I'm aware of, that talk about these technocrats are going to say, we're going to follow the science and we're going to control everything because we know better than everybody else. So he says, I am calling for a global code of conduct that promotes integrity and public information. Well, who determines what information is true? And this is not follow the science. This is follow what we say the science is. That's what's going on. Because science is testing hypotheses all the time, trying to see if what somebody assumes is true is really false. And they're shutting all of this down. In this spirit, Guterres says, I propose a summit of the future to forge a new global consensus on what our future should look like. And what it looks like is a dystopian society that you don't want. As I've said before, 1984 is really, in my view, a horror novel, and these technocrats think it's a user manual. Another quote from this report: fourth, now is the time to correct a glaring blind spot in how we measure economic prosperity and progress. Oh, really? I thought that we had developed systems of that over thousands of years to determine what economic prosperity is. So you see they're changing it. What was one of the things that they put up on the World Economic Forum website? You'll own nothing and you'll love it. And then they tried to back off it. Well, we didn't really mean that. We were just sort of playing around. Listen, this is what they're thinking, and it's very troubling. As currently measured, Guterres says, gross domestic product fails to capture the human environmental destruction of some business activities. Well, listen, it's your technocrats who are destroying businesses. So you ought to be able to measure that and include that in your calculations. There's also, they have this proposed key moments. You have here sustainable development, climate action, new agenda for peace. I mean, you understand how this fits in with all these lines of Bible prophecy that come out of the prophets in the New Testament and what Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse and that are mentioned in Revelation and other prophets. A new agenda for peace, global digital compact, outer space dialogue, emergency response platform for complex crises, declaration of future generations, World Social Summit, Summit of the Future, Transforming Education Summit. Look, I think and a lot of people, I think I speak for a lot of people and say, I'd like to see education transformed. What we have now is a mess. And did you see the mother who she was reading from a book in the library that described a gay sexual act? And the school board was like, you can't talk like this. You can't bring that up. And she's like, this is in the library for my 12-year-old son to read. You're the problem, not me. I'm only quoting the book you have in your library for children to read. And then this is this is part of this report, a wake-up call, things that need to be done. I won't go into this too much. Look at a scenario of breakdown and perpetual crisis. What was it that I think Rahm Emanuel's brother said, or Rahm Emanuel said when he was the chief of staff in the White House? Never let a crisis go to waste. Maybe that comes from Saul Alinsky. Deadly pandemics, uninhabitable planet, destabilizing inequities, and the choices before us, a scenario of breakthrough and the prospect of a greener, safer, better future. Understand, they this thing is not put together overnight. This is a long process to put reports like this, and I try to bring this to you every week. Everybody is putting out these slick, time-consuming, produced reports. takes time to produce them. And this is what is going on. This is what they're doing. Sustainable recovery, healthy people and healthy planet. All countries and sectors to decarbonize by 2050. I'm pretty sure that's impossible. That's not going to happen. But that it doesn't matter whether they can do it. The goal is to destroy the economic system. Here's a grid that they have, or a flow chart that they've come up with. The individual state institutions, what inclusion, protection, and participation, trust. We have to have information, true information. And we'll tell you what that true information is, and you'll understand, and you'll love what we tell you to be true. Measuring and valuing what matters to people in society, and then this is part of the sustainable development goals: no poverty, reduced inequalities, decent work and economic growth, gender inequality. And then here's one of the big, this comes from Accenture, one of the big accounting consulting organizations, shaping the sustainable organization, shaping change through sustainability and DNA. And who's buying into this agenda? Well, Joe Biden's speech at the UN, I will spare you the pain of listening to it. It was about climate change. This is what we need to worry about. And even as this article from the Jerusalem Post notes, Biden's UN speech was painfully contradicted by facts on the ground. Translation, Biden lied. Biden lied, and people have died. The crisis at the border, the intentional takedown and creation of a terrorist superstate in Afghanistan. It's just shocking. Somebody sent me this that popped up in their Facebook feed, an ad. You can see how there's the climate change. It goes from the smokestack to the windmill to the tree. And these images this is from Times Square. They're bombarding people everywhere to get them to think the way the technocrats want them to think. And we need to be thinking biblically, not the way the technocrats want. Foreign policy article, why this energy crisis is different. They even really know climate change and the policies to curb it lie behind skyrocketing gas, coal, and electricity prices in Europe and Asia. So kudos to this person who wrote the article, Jason Bordoff, for foreign policy. He gets it right. It's the policies of the technocrats that are causing prices of gas, and I would say gas, food, energy, other things that you need to live, to skyrocket. They're the ones who are disrupting the climate change. This has impacts. China has a company called Evergrande, which is a big real estate company, and they have soon or just had a $300 billion payment due on some of their debt. It didn't look like they were going to be able to cure that default. There are negotiations. But if Evergrande goes down, this will have a ripple effect, particularly through the real estate and commercial real estate markets worldwide, I think, and could be a crisis many times worse than what we went through back in 2008 and 2009. So, anyway, that's some people going by on a boat enjoying some music that they like that maybe nobody else does. But now I'm going to read you this article, and I said this would be a brief update. Obviously, I don't know what I'm talking about, except I know what I'm talking about when I talk about these things. I don't know how much time it's going to take. We received this financial newsletter by a guy named Bill Bonner that we subscribe to, Rogue Economics. And you need to learn this name and research what this person is about, and you need to write to your senator to stop the confirmation of this lady, Saul Omarova. She has been nominated by the Biden administration to become the director of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. This is the office that controls banks. She is a radical leftist. We're going to read a little bit about her bio. She's an American citizen. She's a law professor at Cornell. She did serve as a consultant in the Treasury Department under the Bush administration between 2001 and 2009. She's never worked in banking. I don't think she's ever worked in the private sector. The comptroller of the currency controls the banks. This lady's mission is to destroy the system of finance and debt in the world. Now, there's a lot of that you can criticize about that. I agree with that. She's really down on Bitcoin. She's really down on Wall Street, but she wants to reshape the banking system that's developed over hundreds of years in the world. Now, we can talk about that, but you need to understand that part of this, she is one of the generals that will take us through the Great Reset to the great setup to the Great Reset. That is what she's going to do. Listen to this article from Bill Bonner. Its title is, this was written on Friday, September 24th. When anything goes, it's titled, everything goes. When anything goes, everything goes. He's writing from Baltimore, Maryland. He says this: what we've been looking at this week in his newsletters is, quote, how the world ends. Now, this is interesting that a financial guy is talking in these apocalyptic end times terms. When the secular world is doing this, the Christian world should set up and take notice that maybe this is the time that the Lord was talking about. And he said this, and today we meet a woman who intends to kill it, the exterminating angel herself, Saul Omarova. Now listen to her background. Okay, she's an American citizen, but listen to this. Born in Kazakhstan, educated in Moscow, at Moscow State University, Madison, Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin in Madison, where she got her PhD, and Chicago, where I think she got her law degree, and now nominated by the Biden team to head up its Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Ms. Omarova makes no effort to disguise what she is up to. She says she aims to effectively end banking as we know it. That is, she wants to replace an entire industry, one that evolved over hundreds of years thanks to the efforts of thousands of innovating, competing bankers who serve millions of willing customers with some monster of her own invention. And I went and read parts of some of her papers. She is a left-wing radical activist. She's going to be put in charge of the banking system in the United States, the most economically powerful country, at least right now, in the world. And look, there's plenty of criticism that can be made of banking, but I'm just telling you this is part and parcel of the great setup to the Great Reset, as I've said many times today. She's never worked for a bank, never run a business, never satisfied a customer, started a company, or made payroll for one, and never held a job outside of academia or the law. We're now counting her time as a special advisor for regulatory policy to the Undersecretary for Domestic Finance in 2006-2007 as a real job. And yet she thinks that she knows what is best for you and 330 million other Americans and perhaps the whole world, and intends to give it to us whether we want it or not. She explains this. This is a quote from her. My new working paper advocates a comprehensive reform of the structure and systematic function of the Fed's balance sheet as the basis for redesigning the core architecture of modern finance. It offers a blueprint for transforming the Fed's balance sheet into what it calls the People's Ledger, capitalized People's Ledger, the ultimate public platform for generating, modulating, and allocating sovereign credit and money in a democratic economy. As Bonner says, I agree with this sentiment. Holy moly. She thinks modern finance was designed and that she has the right to redesign it, allocating money as she sees fit. Yes, she proposes to be the decider, not just the government, but for the private sector too. In particular, she proposes setting up similar to the GOS plan in the Soviet Union, a national investment authority that would be responsible for formulating, financing, and executing a coordinated strategy of sustainable and socially inclusive economic development. There's that ESG stuff that's coming in through the World Economic Forum that's already been adopted. She worked for a big New York law firm, Davis Polk and Wardell. She knows they have practice groups that are set up to change the finance system to comply with these World Economic Forum goals. People, the world is changing as we're sitting here dramatically. It's moving very, very fast. We are way down the great setup to the Great Reset. And wait, there's more. The NIA, that's the National Investment Authority, would act directly in financial markets as a lender, guarantor, securitizer, and venture capitalist with a broad mandate to mobilize, amplify, and direct public and private capital to where it's needed most. Translation, to where I think it should go, and to where the people that follow my agenda think it's go. Because I'm the technocrat. I'm the most intelligent person. I know where it should go. But, my friends, this is one of the most disturbing things I've read in a while. And I read a lot of disturbing things. I listen to a lot of disturbing things. But do you understand that the setup to the Great Reset, the setup to the beast system, will be something that's the logistics in my ACLU, acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. This system has to be developing and in place. So that might be enough, but I'm going to go on just a few more minutes. Well, I'm going to go till I'm done. How about that? So let's look at some of the things going on in the Middle East. The intentional turning of Afghanistan into a terrorist superstate by the Biden administration. This report out of Times of London, Taliban returning to cutting off thieves' hands and feet. There are reports that they're hanging bodies in town squares, in towns and cities all over around Afghanistan. And now they're fighting, you'll see in a minute, they're fighting with ISIS, but they're all part of the same terrorist organization. They're just fighting now to see who's going to be in control of how this is implemented and how radically it's implemented and how fast and how bad it's going to be. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how fast we get to the when. And I apologize if I'm upsetting you, but this is, I've researched this, as you know. I'm very careful. Now, this is, I think, significant. I think that Psalm 83 talks about a group of nations that are conniving against Israel. And I think that the Abraham Accords are part and parcel of this. I'm all for peace, but I don't like these. I don't like that this religious cooperation between, quote, Christianity or Roman Catholicism and some form of Judaism and Islam is a good thing. This is not a good thing. This is the setup of the global religion that we will have eventually near the end. So now this comes, and so one of the pieces that's missing out of Psalm 83 is Iraq. I believe that's mentioned in this. And look at this. Over 300 prominent Iraqis publicly call for full peace with Israel. In an unprecedented plea for regional reconciliation, over 300 prominent Iraqis called for their country to normalize ties with Israel on Friday night. Quote, "We demand full diplomatic relations with the state of Israel and a new policy of normalization based on people-to-people relations with the citizens of that country." So this is a big change. Now, they met in Erbil, which is the regional capital of the Kurdish region of Iraq, which is a separate region. They're not Arabs. They are largely Muslims. Pray for believers in that area. They are subject to pretty severe persecution. But there have been, well, I won't say any more about it because of the security situation that's involved. Just pray for believers in that region. Pray for believers in Iraq. Pray for believers in Syria. Pray for believers in Afghanistan, where there is severe persecution going on, and I fear in Afghanistan that Christians are being executed. So this organization comes together 302 people in Iraq in an unprecedented plea. Let's see, I already said that. This comes out, there was an editorial by one of the people involved with this in the Wall Street Journal Saturday, calling Iraq should join the Abraham Accords. The article says this: more than 300 of my fellow Iraqis from Baghdad, Mosul, and Al-Anbar. Now, this is the region of Assyria. We issued a public demand for Iraq to enter into relations with Israel and its people through the Abraham Accords. Now, listen to this paragraph. We are an assembly of Sunnis and Shiites featuring members of the Sons of Iraq, that's a Sunni organization, Sons of Iraq Awakening Movement, which I lead in addition to intellectuals, tribal elders, and youth activists of the 2019-2021 protest movement. Some of us have faced down ISIS and Al-Qaeda on the battlefield. Through blood and tears, we have demonstrated that we oppose all extremists, whether Sunni jihadists or Iran-backed Shiite militias. This is I think this is one of the most significant developments I've seen in the last number of months, that this piece of Psalm 83, which I personally think is a prophecy yet about the future, this is a piece of that falling into place under the guise of the Abraham Accords, which we all like peace, don't we? But what happens in the end times when people are saying peace and safety? What does the scripture say happens? It's not a good thing. It's a false peace. We know that there will be no true peace until the Prince of Peace is here. So pay attention to these things and stay in your Bible. Another thing that needs to be addressed, this is Danny Danon, the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. The Iranian threat must be addressed at the UN General Assembly. Again, that's meeting this week. Caroline Glick has a great, as usual, a great article in Friday's Israel Hayom. Let me pull that up. I want to read a little bit of that to you. She's looking at the situation. Now, one of the things she looks at is the fact that Danny Gantz, about 2 weeks ago, gave an interview to Foreign Policy magazine. That's not the... Here it is. Yes, this is the article. And in this interview, Gantz, who's the defense minister of Israel, you see him here in this picture with Naftali Bennett, and I think that's Ayelet Shaked, she's in Bennett's party. She's the interior minister, current interior minister of Israel. Israel can live with the new Iran nuclear deal, defense minister says. Now, this is a very significant interview. This is Danny Gantz. And the Israeli government, I mean, Gantz was the prime minister in waiting just last year, and has even been offered the position of finance of prime minister if in a new coalition with Netanyahu just recently. Here he is. What is he saying? Israel can live with the new Iran deal. Can Israel really live with the new Iran deal? So Caroline looks at, as she does in her articles so often, she looks at the situation. So the title of her article is Israel's Blame My Predecessor Strategy. Iran strategy. Last week, Foreign Policy magazine published an interview with Defense Minister Benny Gantz. In it, Gantz said that Israel has dropped its opposition to the Biden administration's plan to return to the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. With Gantz's statement, the full expanse of the Lapid-Gantz-Bennett government strategy for contending with Iran's nuclear program has come into view, and it is deeply alarming. Over the past several weeks and months, the discourse about Iran's nuclear program has been dominated by the question of how far Iran is from nuclear breakout. Now listen, over years we've heard they're a week away, they're a month away, they're 6 months away, they're 3 years, they're 5 years away. The number has always been changing. I think there is general consensus right now that they have enough to make a nuclear weapon if they really wanted to. But why is this number always changing? 3 months. It's 3 months a year ago, then it's 7 months last year. Then it's 4 months this year. Then it's 6 weeks. Then it's 3 weeks. Then it's a month, according to our Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. Tony Blinking, I think he should be called. But what does Caroline say? Caroline says, listen, the reason that number was always changing was because Israel was doing things in the background to undermine the JCPOA deal that Obama put in place in 2015, and John Kerry and these other people who are now back in charge. The same people that negotiated this are now in charge. And they're going to go along with it. Now Gantz is saying they're going to go along with it. And it's rather shocking. And Caroline says, this is our last line of defense. Another line of defense that we had was we had an agreement between Netanyahu and Putin that we could bomb Iranian installations to slow Iran down in Syria and Lebanon, working with Hezbollah and other Shiite militia groups. But now Putin has pulled that back. And Caroline's like, there's really, we had the fight against this, but if we go back to the JCPOA, we take away the economic sanctions that were causing a lot of the slowdown as well. So all of these things are operating. At home, she says, the same Iran that was just months or weeks from nuclear breakout was also just months or week away from internal revolution that, with the support of Iran's neighbors, could have brought down the regime of the Ayatollahs. Gantz's statement to foreign policy that Israel's new government has dropped its predecessor's opposition to the administration's plan to return to the JCPOA means that Israel is no longer pursuing the economic component of its previous strategy. This is troubling, but listen, how does this fit into the end time scenario where Persia will deem itself powerful enough logistically to invade Israel with others in a coalition? Do you see how I personally believe that this is coming together? Now, the question is how quickly. But the logistics, the infrastructure of that seem to be, to me, to be ramping up week by week. So what is the Lapid, Gantz, Bennett's government's strategy on Iran? By canceling all four components of Israel's long-standing successful strategy for containing and undermining Iran, the government has made it clear that its strategy for dealing with Iran's nuclear program is to raise the white flag of surrender. Rather than present a new strategy for preventing Iran from crossing the nuclear threshold, the government has focused its efforts on selling its strategy of lying down and doing nothing. The government justifies its decision to let the clock run down by casting the blame for its failure to act on the person who conceived and implemented the Israeli strategy that blocked Iran from crossing the nuclear threshold now. In other words, hey, you have a crisis, you have a problem, it's our predecessor's fault. Even though the predecessor was doing all the four components to try to slow Iran down. Sounds a little bit like what's going on with the border crisis in the United States and to blame the predecessor. Do you see the parallels here? It's stunning. Although everyone knows who it is, they are scapegoating. Bennett has opted to refer to him only as my predecessor. So this is troubling news. And this sort of, I think, this strategy undermines this interview that I mentioned from Maharev, I think that's how you pronounce it, newspaper, with Major General Tal Kalman, who is the head of the Israeli Defense Force, how they're going to deal with Iran. And he said, we're ready, we're preparing, but you understand, he's being undermined by the government, just like our military is being undermined and reshaped by our government. Again, another one of these parallels. This also from Foreign Policy, dated, I don't have the date, I think this was about a week and a half ago. Israel isn't strong enough to attack Iran. Look, I think Israel can defend itself, but it can always use help. And I'm not sure attacking Iran is a very, very difficult task. Iran is essentially, it's why the countries there last for centuries or longer, many centuries in one shot, because it's an almost impossible country to invade. You're never going to get by with the ground invasion in Iran because it is essentially a mountain fortress. So that makes everything very problematic. So how do you get into this mountain fortress and attack underground facilities? Now, Israel has been very creative as anybody has, I think, ever been on the planet, but it's still a problematic thing. At the same time that's going on, the progressives in the United States were upset that they had put funding of Iron Dome, $1 billion for funding Iron Dome, in the budget. So they, long story short, they demanded a vote on including this in the, I think, the continuing resolution. And here's the vote. It passed 402 to 420 to 9. The squad, you see one of the members of the squad, our friend AOC, crying about this inclusion. They wanted to remove Iron Dome because it's not fair that Israel has Iron Dome, of course. And by extension, they're saying it's not fair that Israel only shoots down the rockets that come into Israel. They should shoot down the rockets that the Palestinians fire into their own buildings. That would be fair. That would be justice. So she's upset, and somebody should make up a campaign slogan, make AOC cry. Here's this, by the way, this is an editorial cartoon from Haaretz, a left-wing newspaper like the New York Times in Israel. Look at this. This is the squad, and you see them. They're shooting down Iron Dome. This is what they want. They want to get rid of Iron Dome. Notice they're not, and I think this is 100% accurate, they're not shooting down the rockets that Hamas is firing into Israel, or the Hezbollah will fire into Israel, because they don't care about that. This is a battle of spiritual forces, at this dark spiritual forces at this time. I don't know how else to explain it. Another thing that's going on, this is the member states of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There are, started by China, Shanghai, in China. They have 8 members. Currently, the Russian Federation, the Republic of Kazakhstan. Remember where this new nominee for the office of the controller of the currency was born and raised in Kazakhstan. By the way, because before Kazakhstan was a republic, she left about 1991 during the fall of the Soviet Union. So she grew up in the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan, and she went to Moscow State University. So you need to kind of put those pieces together and say, I wonder if this would lead to any problems in the way she views things or what she would try to do. We already showed you that she's trying to institute a Soviet-style organization to handle investment. You have the Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, India, Pakistan, and China. Now they have cooperating organizations. You can see some of there here. Afghanistan, observer states, Afghanistan, Belarus, Iran, Mongolia. But the key article this week is that Jonathan Spire, as always, a great analysis in the Jerusalem Post on Friday. And what does the title of the article say? An Iran-China alliance, ? Tehran's accession to full membership in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization reflects deepening ties. Now, we've talked about the fact that there are deepening ties between China and Iran. They've entered into a 25-year agreement involving billions of dollars that will be used to fund Iran's attempt to bring about hegemony in the Middle East, get rid of the United States and make it an Iranian hegemony as opposed to a United States Western-leaning hegemony. So Jonathan notes that for 13 years Iran has been trying. They first applied to get into the Shanghai, the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, 13 years ago. And here they are now getting in. At this particular time, again, this is interesting timing given everything else that's going on. Iranian media, Spire says, quoted an article by AFP, the French press organization, were jubilant concerning this development. Cayenne, a publication associated with hardline positions in Iran, like the Ayatollahs and the new president, Raisi, wrote that, quote, "From now on, Iran can implement its policy of multilateralism, progressively abandon a vision based solely on the West, and mitigate Western sanctions." The world, Raisi spoke at this conference where this approval seems to have been granted. The world has entered a new era, Raisi said. Hegemony and unilateralism have failed. The international balance from now on leans towards multilateralism and the redistribution of powers towards independent countries. Unilateral sanctions don't uniquely target one country. It has become evident that in recent years they affect more independent countries, especially SCO members. Well, look at the list of SCO members. Spire goes on to note the U.S.'s hasty exit from Afghanistan was perhaps a clumsy attempt to draw a firm red line under the 9/11 wars in order to focus attention and resources on the demands of this new strategic contest and era. Historic strategic contests of this type between global powers do not tend to remain confined to a particular geographic space or to particular geographic spaces. Look at the Cold War that happened from 1950 to 1991 between the U.S. and USSR-led systems. It affected many areas around the world. Spire concludes with this. So the emergent global contest between the U.S. and China will not leave the Middle East as an area of non-alignment. And as the lines harden, Tehran, for both geostrategic and political reasons, is likely to continue to draw closer to Beijing. Iran's admittance to the SCO is a significant milestone along that road. Folks, we live in the time of the great setup to the great reset. It is operating on many different levels. Prepare your hearts, live holy lives, share the gospel, disciple new believers, warn people about what is coming. Because we are entering, I think, on the cusp of a time that will be unique in human history. That's what I firmly believe. I pray that it's not true, but all the indicators are that it's coming. I have no idea. I'm not a date setter. I have no idea how quickly this comes. All I can say is all of us who talk about Bible prophecy, nobody in 2019 was really talking about what was going to happen in 2020 and 2021. It came like a tsunami. More tsunamis are coming. Prepare your hearts. Look up. Prepare for the return of the Lord. God bless. Thank you.